My family cut me off at dinner. Then my assistant called. On speaker. In front of them all. SoftBank just confirmed. $40 million. IPO is official. Hey there. Welcome to today's story. Whatever you're doing, walking, resting, maybe just scrolling, take a breath and settle in. Because today's story starts with something many of us know too well. Being underestimated by the very people who are supposed to believe in us. Have you ever felt like you were invisible in your own family? Like no matter what you achieved, it was never enough? Well, you're not alone. In this story, we meet Isla, a woman born into a powerful legacy, but told she didn't belong in it. But instead of arguing, she decided to build something so undeniable that it would speak for itself. Stick around to see how she turns silence into strength. And if this story speaks to you, I hope you'll hit that subscribe button, so I can keep bringing more stories like this to life. Thanks for being here.
They always said I was different, but never in a way that sounded like a compliment. In a family of polished politicians, Ivy League prodigies, and boardroom billionaires, I was the misfit with code-stained fingers and a caffeine addiction. My name is Isla Whitmore, middle child of the Whitmore dynasty of Boston. Think old money, stone mansions, holiday galas, and first-name invitations to presidential fundraisers. And me? I used to rewrite the code of our smart home system just to keep my bedroom door locked from unauthorized siblings. Growing up in the Whitmore estate felt like living inside a museum curated by ambition. Every hallway whispered the names of powerful ancestors, and every dinner was a silent resume contest. My older brother, Preston Jr., was practically born with a Wharton degree in one hand and a Rolex in the other. Fiona, my younger sister, charmed senators before she could legally drive and gave TED Talks at 19 about redefining modern femininity. And then there was me, Isla, the one who built a facial recognition security system for fun at age 13 and got grounded because it locked my father out of his wine cellar. You learn early how to disappear in a family that never really sees you. They called me quiet, peculiar, single-minded, never brilliant, never bold. I wasn't being groomed for greatness. I was being ignored into submission. I didn't rebel. I outgrew them before I even hit high school. My memories of those years are a montage of marble floors, cold glances, and being told to straighten your back, dear, at every social event. Once, at the annual Whitmore Foundation Gala, a senator's wife mistook me for an intern and handed me her purse. My mother smiled and said, "Isla's always been humble." It wasn't humility, it was invisibility. By age 15, I was staying up until 3 a.m. coding prototypes for mobile healthcare interfaces while everyone else was arguing about SAT prep and country club internships. By 17, I had turned down Princeton to accept a partial scholarship to Caltech, which my father called a sideways move. I didn't argue. I didn't owe them that. College was my first taste of oxygen. I could breathe, build, fail, and build again without someone peering over my shoulder with a glass of vintage Bordeaux, asking when I'd outgrow this phase. I survived on ramen, internships, and teaching myself everything no one had time to teach me back home. I worked 2 part-time jobs to cover the rest of my tuition, bartending and troubleshooting medical kiosks in clinic waiting rooms. I wasn't chasing prestige, I was chasing function. I wanted to build something that mattered, something that would last long after the name Whitmore stopped meaning anything. I started sketching ideas for what would later become Carebridge in a crowded bus on the way home from a night shift at St. Francis Clinic. A woman 2 seats in front of me was crying quietly, holding a referral slip to a specialist dated 6 weeks out. 6 weeks for a diagnosis she didn't understand. Her hands were shaking. Her husband didn't look much better. That's when the first line of code hit me like lightning. What if the system wasn't broken, just misconnected? I went home and stayed up until sunrise, writing a prototype for a platform that could match patients to available specialists based on real-time data, medical urgency, and region. I didn't have money, I didn't have a team, I didn't even have a desk, but I had a fire that no legacy trust fund could buy. And I had silence, which for the first time in my life didn't feel like erasure. It felt like space. The thing about being invisible your whole life, you learn to move in shadows. While Preston was promoted to VP of Whitmore Capital and Fiona hosted fundraisers for her fiancé's campaign, I was quietly teaching myself HIPAA compliance frameworks and designing UI wireframes on a salvaged tablet. I rented a tiny unit above a laundromat in South Boston, half of which I converted into a workstation with cardboard furniture and borrowed Wi-Fi. I didn't tell anyone in my family what I was doing, not because I wanted to surprise them, but because I knew they wouldn't care. Or worse, they'd try to claim it once it worked. They say your 20s are for figuring out who you are. For me, it was about unlearning who they said I had to be. Naomi came into my life like a well-placed semicolon. She applied for a part-time admin role I'd posted on a healthcare job board. Her resume was unimpressive, but her brain wasn't. She had been a nurse, burned out from hospital politics, and wanted to build something that doesn't fatal people. When she said that, I almost cried. We couldn't pay ourselves yet, but we worked anyway. 7 days a week. Sandwiches from convenience stores, brainstorming on whiteboards with broken markers. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't Instagrammable, but it was ours. By the time CareBridge hit beta, we were running on code, caffeine, and blind faith. The only thing louder than the noise outside was the fire inside. And still, my family thought I was doing some tech admin job for a clinic somewhere. At Christmas dinner, when my father asked what unit I worked in now, I just smiled and said, "Still the same, busy." Preston gave me a sweater 2 sizes too small. Fiona gave me a candle. I gave myself a patent. We didn't have a lobby, or even chairs that matched. The conference room was a corner with the apartment partitioned by a bookshelf that leaned slightly to the left. But we had a name and a product, CareBridge. It started as a string of code and a hypothesis on a legal pad. Now it had evolved into a functioning platform capable of matching patients with specialists using AI-driven triage tools, calendar syncing with medical offices, and encrypted document sharing. And more importantly, it worked. The first breakthrough came when Naomi cold emailed a medical director at Norwell General Hospital. She worked under him years ago and remembered he had a soft spot for innovation, so she gambled. Within a week, we were sitting in a badly lit hospital boardroom demoing CareBridge in front of 3 administrators and 1 very skeptical IT guy. He tried to poke holes in our data compliance wall. Naomi countered. I walked them through the back-end logic line by line. 10 minutes after we left, he emailed, "When can we start the trial?" We high-fived in the elevator, then immediately got back to work because neither of us could afford to celebrate. I slept on a mattress on the floor. Naomi worked 2 shifts a week at a wellness center to cover her half of the rent. We coded on borrowed time, pitched investors in coffee shops, and lived off the cheapest possible sushi you could buy without risking hospitalization. There were days we wanted to quit. The week AWS glitched and we lost 48 hours of user feedback data, Naomi cried in the bathroom. I almost joined her. But somehow, we kept going. Every no we received from investors felt like a slap, but every maybe felt like oxygen. Most of them didn't get it. They said healthcare was too slow, they said we were too small, they asked if we had a male co-founder. One even offered to fund us if I stepped down and let a more seasoned CEO take over. I smiled and said I'd think about it, then never called him again. We pitched 42 investors in total before one finally said yes. Her name was Genevieve Tran, a former hospital executive turned angel investor with a reputation for betting on female founders. She showed up in flats and a hoodie, asked the right questions, and said, "You're not building software, you're building a bridge." She wired us $350,000 3 days later. That money felt like a miracle. We got our first actual office, a corner space in an old garment factory with creaky floors and exposed brick. It was freezing in winter and sweltering in summer, but it was ours. We hired a back-end engineer named Marcos who wrote code like poetry, and a UX designer named Jules, who used to work in pediatric care and knew exactly how to make a screen feel safe for a nervous patient. Our team grew to 5, then 9. CareBridge went from idea to momentum. Still, I told no one in my family. Not because I didn't want them to know, but because I'd already heard the script. That's cute, Isla, but have you thought about what you'll do when it fails? You know, Fiona has a contact at Johns Hopkins who might give you some real job experience. Just remember, people like us fund startups. We don't run them. So I kept silent. I still drove the same beat-up Fagan to family events, still wore H&M to holiday parties where Fiona glided in with $1,000 heels. When people asked what I did, I smiled and said, a little tech stuff, mostly admin. They never asked more. But silence has a strange kind of power. And the deeper my roots went into CareBridge, the more I realized I didn't need them to believe in me. I just needed them to stay out of my way. Late one night, Naomi and I were sitting on the floor of the office, eating reheated pizza and staring at a bug in the triage logic that refused to cooperate. I remember saying out loud, half joking, "Imagine what my family would say if they knew we were about to pitch to the Massachusetts Hospital Association." Naomi raised an eyebrow. "Honestly, I think they'd call security." We laughed, but I knew she wasn't wrong. And then we got the call. Norwell's trial results were in. Wait times had dropped by 41%, patient satisfaction up 38%, specialist utilization jumped. They wanted to expand. 3 more hospitals signed up within the month. Then we got the email from Massachusetts General. They were interested in a pilot. My hands shook reading it. I stared at the screen like it had spoken a prophecy. This was no longer just an idea. This was real, tangible, scalable. But I still didn't tell my parents, because in my gut, I knew when they finally found out, it wouldn't be through me. It would be through headlines, and they'd deserve every inch of that shock. They say success makes noise, but in my case, it whispered first. The whispers started with journalists reaching out, quiet pings in my inbox from tech newsletters and healthcare blogs asking, "Can we feature your story?" I ignored the first few. I wasn't ready to be visible yet, not until I knew the foundation was stable enough to stand scrutiny. But when Fast Health Journal asked for an interview after our MGH pilot success, Naomi cornered me at the coffee machine. "You need to say yes." I hesitated. "It's not the right time." "You always say that," she replied, arms crossed. "The right time isn't going to ring your doorbell with a press badge." So I said yes, quietly, cautiously. The article went live on a Wednesday afternoon under the headline, "The Quiet Founder Behind Healthcare's Next Big Disruption." I almost vomited. By Thursday, we had 37 new emails from hospitals. Friday, a VC partner requested a meeting. Monday, a startup scout from Tokyo messaged about international licensing. And still, no one in my family had any idea. The holidays came early that year. My mother sent out formal invitations for the Whitmore Holiday Brunch, a yearly spectacle involving string quartets, catered truffle omelets, and a photographer from Boston Legacy Weekly pretending to be candid. I almost declined, but part of me wanted to see what would happen. Not to gloat, just to witness, firsthand, the bizarre dance of being underestimated while quietly running a company worth more than half their portfolio combined. So I went, in my old boots, hair in a bun, no makeup. The brunch was everything I remembered. Over-decorated, over-catered, overcompensating. Fiona was already there, sipping a mimosa and laughing too loudly. She wore a red velvet dress that screamed, "Senator's wife in training." Preston arrived 15 minutes late and still managed to act like the room had been waiting for him. He made a beeline to our father to announce he'd secured a new portfolio deal with a fintech firm whose name he couldn't pronounce. They all clapped like it was the State of the Union. I sat by the window, watching the snow fall on the stone path I used to sneak across as a kid. Nobody asked where I'd been lately. I didn't offer. My mother passed me a plate of cranberry scones with a tight smile. "You still working, what was it again, at that clinic in Cambridge?" I nodded, something like that. She nodded back, satisfied she'd successfully dismissed me without effort. Then came the moment I didn't expect. Across the room, standing near the fireplace, was Senator Donnelly, shaking hands with Preston and smiling like they'd just cured cancer. I recognized him from the healthcare policy conference I had spoken at 2 weeks earlier. He had taken notes during my keynote. Afterward, he'd handed me his card and asked me to consult on legislation involving digital access to specialists. I hadn't told anyone, but now, seeing him again, here in my family's house, made something click. I didn't want their approval anymore. I wanted something better. Acknowledgement on my own terms. Just as I was preparing to leave, Fiona's fiancé, Grayson, cornered me near the kitchen. He was the human embodiment of smugness. Cashmere coat, cufflinks, and a way of talking like he was always explaining something to you, never with you. "I read that thing about Cambridge," he said casually, like it was a footnote in the morning paper. "Interesting little initiative you've got going." I tilted my head. "Didn't know you read industry briefs?" He smirked. "I don't. Fiona flagged it. Says you're making waves in tech or healthcare or whatever hybrid space that is. Impressive." Then came the real reason. "My campaign is putting together a healthcare innovation panel. Fiona thought you might want to contribute. Maybe lend your name." Lend my name? I wanted to laugh. The same people who once questioned my path now wanted to borrow it. "You know," he added with a grin, "being part of something bigger than yourself could give your project some real legs." I stared at him for a long second, then smiled sweetly. "It already has legs," I said, "and it's walking just fine without hand-holding from political interns." Grayson blinked. Naomi would have high-fived me if she were there. Afterward, I slipped away, coat over my arm, boots crunching fresh snow as I walked toward my car parked 3 blocks away. My hands were frozen, but my heart felt fireproof. That night, Naomi called. "I got an email from someone at SoftBank," she said, barely containing herself. "They want a video pitch." I froze mid-step, as in, SoftBank? SoftBank? Yes, they said a partner read about us in Fast Health, wants to talk investment. I sat down on the edge of my bed and laughed. Not because I was surprised, because I knew this was the whisper before the thunder. The last time I was assigned a specific seat at a Whitmore family dinner, I was 14 and my chair wobbled. They said it was a fluke. Now, 15 years later, as I approached the long mahogany table in the dining room of my parents' Georgian estate, I noticed that same damn chair, still wobbling, still assigned to me. Some things never change. The table was set like a restoration hardware catalog with an inferiority complex, candlelight flickering over vintage china, place cards written in gold ink, and wine glasses aligned like soldiers. Everything was perfect, except the intentions. I knew what this dinner was, an ambush in pearls, a polite assassination of dignity. My mother, Vivian, stood at the head of the table in a sapphire blue sheath dress, smile frozen at medium chill. My father, Charles Sr., was nursing a glass of something expensive and strong. Preston was already seated, phone in hand, probably pretending he was too busy to be here. Fiona adjusted her napkin twice before I even sat down. No one asked about Cambridge. No one asked about me. Instead, the conversation ping-ponged between Fiona's wedding seating chart and Preston's latest strategic pivot at the firm, which was, as far as I could tell, just rebranding nepotism as vision. Dinner was served. Filet mignon, of course. At some point between the truffle risotto and the second glass of red, my father cleared his throat. It was subtle, but in the Whitmore household, it was the sound of walls closing in. "I suppose we should get to it," he said, glancing at Vivian, who nodded like this was a boardroom. "Your father and I," she began, placing her fork down with exaggerated grace, "have spent considerable time reassessing our estate structure." This wasn't dinner, it was the agenda. "With Preston's expansion in emerging markets," she continued, "and Fiona's upcoming nuptials to a man with national political ambitions, we felt it appropriate to formalize certain legacy transitions." She paused to take a sip of wine, then added, almost like an afterthought, "Naturally, we wanted to include you in this conversation as well." That was a lie. The decision had already been made. The conversation was a performance. My father steepled his fingers. "Preston will assume control of the family trust next quarter. Fiona and Grayson will receive the Cape Cod property as it aligns with their public image and fundraising commitments." He turned to me, no softness in his gaze. "And you, Isla, while we've tolerated your non-traditional choices for some time, we believe it's now necessary to set some boundaries." My mouth was dry. I hadn't even spoken, and I was already exhausted. "We're formally cutting off your annual distribution," he said, "effective immediately." No dramatic music, no gasps, just porcelain silence and 4 pairs of eyes pretending this was rational. "Until," he added, "you pursue a path more aligned with Whitmore standards." I stared at him. "You mean give up my company and do something that looks better on a Christmas card?" My mother tilted her head. "Darling, don't be emotional." Emotional? I was calculating. Fiona chimed in, voice honeyed and patronizing. "We're just concerned, Isla. The startup world is volatile. You've all been a little idealistic." I looked around the table, trying to reconcile the fact that these were my people, my blood. But they had never seen me, only the outline of who they wanted me to be. I opened my mouth to respond, then my purse buzzed. Once, twice, then 3 times in rapid succession. Only one person had that emergency protocol, Naomi. I reached down and slid my phone into my lap. Fiona rolled her eyes, assuming I was being rude. I glanced at the screen. "Naomi, SoftBank deal confirmed, $40 million. Valuation, $110 million. Goldman onboarding next week. You're officially the CEO of a 9-figure company." I read it again, just to be sure, then looked up at my father. "You're cutting me off," I said evenly, "because you think I'm a risk." He nodded, firm, a well-intentioned one, but yes. I inhaled deeply, then slowly stood. "Excuse me for one moment." Preston snorted. "Running from hard conversations now?" "No," I replied, "running a company." I stepped a few feet from the table, turned slightly away, and hit speaker. "Naomi," I said, "you're on with me." Her voice crackled through the phone, enthusiastic and unaware of the theater she had just entered. "Isla, it's done. We're official. SoftBank wired funds this afternoon. The valuation locked at $110 million. Goldman's calling you Monday to schedule the IPO prep. Also, Forbes just confirmed they want to do a founder feature next month." Silence. I turned around slowly to face my family, holding the phone like a mirror. Naomi kept talking. "This is going to move fast. I'll loop in legal for the announcement draft, but I wanted you to hear it from me first. You're amazing. You earned this." I ended the call, then sat back down, quietly. The room felt radioactive. My father blinked. My mother's lips parted, but no sound came out. Fiona looked like she was trying to calculate how many zeros were in $110 million. Preston? He reached for his wine like it might explain what just happened. Finally, Evelyn, my great-aunt, who had sat silently through most of the dinner, chuckled softly. "Well," she said, "I guess this chair isn't so wobbly after all." I smiled. Not because they finally saw me, but because I didn't need them to anymore. The dining room was still frozen when I pushed back my chair. My mother's hand trembled as she reached for her wine, missing the stem slightly. Fiona sat stiffly, as if straightening her spine could restore her sense of superiority. Preston tried to play it cool, but he kept glancing at my phone like it might explode with another billion-dollar notification. My father, Charles Sr., hadn't said a word. He was staring at his plate like it might offer a counter-proposal. Only Evelyn looked relaxed, sipping her wine and watching the entire scene unfold like it was her favorite play. Later, I'd realized she'd always known this moment would come. She was just waiting to see how I'd play it. I stood up again. "Thank you for dinner." Vivian blinked, "But dessert hasn't been served yet." "I've had enough," I said simply. As I turned to go, my father finally spoke. "Isla." I paused at the threshold. "We should revisit the estate structure," he said carefully. "Clearly, circumstances have evolved." I turned around. "Circumstances haven't evolved. You just finally found them out." He frowned. "Don't be dramatic." "No, that's your line," I said. "I'm being accurate." Fiona, never one to let a spotlight dim on someone else, leaned in. "Look, obviously we were surprised, but that doesn't mean we don't support you." I raised an eyebrow. "You supported me by cutting me off?" "It was a misunderstanding," she rushed. "No," I said. "It was a perfect understanding. You all decided I was worth less because I didn't fit into your pre-written legacy script." Preston set his fork down. "Okay, so what now? You walk out and cut us all off in return? Is that the grown-up move here?" I smiled coldly. "No, Preston, the grown-up move is setting boundaries, which I'm doing now." My mother, finally recovering, softened her voice. "Darling, let's not make this personal." I gave her a long look. "It's only personal. You made it that way." My father cleared his throat again, that same boardroom signal. "Let's be pragmatic. If your company is growing, it makes sense to incorporate it into the family trust. There are tax advantages, investment strategies, estate alignment." "There it is," I muttered, "the pivot." "I beg your pardon," he said, voice tightening. "You still don't see it, do you?" I replied. "You didn't believe in me when I had nothing. Now that I have something, you want to fold it into your empire, pretend it was part of the plan all along." Vivian tried to interject, but I held up a hand. "You disinherited me while I was building something meant to change lives. You didn't ask what it did. You didn't care. All you saw was that it wasn't part of your narrative." I walked toward the door. "Now you want to reframe it, claim it, because suddenly I'm valuable." "No one's trying to claim anything," my mother protested. "Then why is he talking about estate alignment?" The silence that followed was telling. Evelyn chuckled under her breath again. "This is better than anything I've seen at the theater this year." I smiled faintly at her and walked out, my heels echoing down the marble corridor. I didn't go home right away. I drove to the office. It was late, and the building was mostly dark, but our floor still buzzed with soft overhead light. Naomi was in her corner, hoodie up, eyes glued to a Gantt chart, earbuds in. She looked up when I walked in and ripped the earbuds out. "Tell me you said something savage." I grinned. "Several things, actually." Naomi threw me a pack of mini Reese's, our version of champagne. "Tell me you didn't tell them about the foundation yet?" she added. "God, no," I said, flopping into the chair. "They don't deserve to know." Because what I hadn't told them, what I hadn't told anyone yet, was that I wasn't just growing Carebridge. I was reclaiming the Whitmore legacy entirely. 3 weeks before that dinner, I filed paperwork to create the Whitmore Catalyst Foundation, seeded when mulli 10 million from the Carebridge equity I refused to flaunt. It come fan a PR stunt, it was a promise. to fund women in tech, especially women from underrepresented backgrounds, to create coding camps in public schools, to build mentorship pipelines that actually led somewhere. I wasn't trying to impress my family anymore. I was building a new one. The irony? I used the family name not to honor them, but to overwrite them. Naomi leaned back. So what now? Now, I said, we launch the foundation, prep the IPO, and build something so unshakable that it won't matter what any legacy says I was supposed to be. She grinned. Sounds about right. 2 days later, I got a package at the office. No note, no return address, just a beautifully crafted wooden box and a key taped to the top. I opened it. Inside was a single object, my grandfather's old gold pocket watch. I hadn't seen it since I was a kid. It was always on display in my father's study. It was rumored to be a gift from a U.S. president, though my dad never specified which one. Underneath the watch, a note, unsigned, written in my father's unmistakable block script. It's time. Yours now. I stared at it for a long moment. A gift? A gesture? A peace offering? Maybe. But I wasn't interested in relics anymore. I placed it gently back in the box and slid it under my desk. It could wait. I had real work to do. No headlines screamed my name when the IPO documents were finalized. No ticker tape parades. No champagne-flooded boardrooms. Just a quiet Friday morning in Kendall Square where Naomi handed me a pen with trembling hands and said, "You're about to sign a piece of paper worth more than your entire family estate." We laughed. Then we cried a little. Then we got back to work. Because that's what this had always been. Not noise, not flash, but work. The IPO launched CareBridge into the stratosphere. $220 million valuation on opening day, with expansion deals pending in California, the UK, and Singapore. But the real power? The real win? Thousands of patients across the country were now using our platform to see specialists faster. Wait times had dropped by 60% on average. A doctor in rural Montana could now consult with a neurologist in under 36 hours. A mom in Newark could schedule a pediatric cardiology visit without begging for referrals. The world didn't need another app. It needed access, and that's what we gave it. 3 weeks after the IPO, I got a text from Evelyn. "You're not obligated to say yes, but your father wants to see the office. On his own. No mother, no siblings, no agenda. Allegedly." I stared at it for a long time. My first instinct was absolutely not. But then curiosity kicked in. Would he come in wearing his usual air of superiority? Would he pretend he always believed in me? Or had something actually shifted? I texted Naomi. "My dad wants a tour. Thoughts?" She replied instantly. "Set boundaries, lock the finance files, smile like a CEO." So I said yes. He arrived on a Thursday at 2 p.m. sharp. Navy suit, monogrammed cufflinks, that slow, calculating gaze I'd seen at 100 shareholder meetings growing up. But this time, I was the one hosting. He stepped into the office slowly, eyes scanning the minimalist space, glass walls, soft acoustic panels, the whiteboard covered in strategy maps and Post-it notes. Naomi greeted him politely, then vanished like a stagehand pulling curtains. "I wasn't sure what to expect," he admitted, walking beside me. I kept my voice neutral. "And?" He looked around. "It's real." I raised an eyebrow. "You thought I made it up?" He gave a small, awkward chuckle. "I thought it was smaller, more conceptual. You've built something very real." There it was. Not quite an apology, not quite admiration, but something. I showed him our strategy deck, our pilot data, our expansion roadmap. I kept the conversation professional, clipped, clear. And when we walked into the server room, he paused. "This was never in the family plan," he said softly. "Neither was Fiona's second engagement party, but here we are," I replied. He smirked. "Touché." We returned to the conference room. Before leaving, he pulled something from his coat pocket, a folded brochure. Whitmore Capital is launching a healthcare innovation fund, he said carefully. You'd be the perfect flagship partner. There it was, the pitch. I nodded, took the brochure, and slid it into my drawer without opening it. I appreciate the offer, I said, but CareBridge has no plans to bring in family equity. My father nodded slowly, absorbing the blow. Very well. Still, I hope we can find a way forward. He stood. You've done something extraordinary, Isla, and I say that rarely. I didn't thank him. I didn't offer a hug. I walked him to the elevator, and as the doors closed, he looked at me and said, "You made the Whitmore name relevant again." I smiled. No, I made it mine. That night, Naomi and I hosted a celebration dinner for the CareBridge team. Just our employees, no suits, no funders, no external friends of the company. Just the people who built it. We toasted with ginger beer and kombucha. Jules baked cupcakes. Marcos printed everyone a mug that read, "I triaged before it was cool." Evelyn showed up late, wearing a scarf that looked like it belonged in a Paris art studio. She pulled me aside near the snack table. "I see the press is still calling you the Whitmore Wonder." I groaned. Branding is a beast. She leaned in. "You know, I used to think legacy was about preservation, but you've taught me it's about reconstruction." I smiled at her. "Funny, I thought I was just angry coding." She laughed. "Well, sometimes revolutions are born in basements and built on ramen." The next morning, I walked through the office early. Lights off, just morning sun slanting through the glass walls. I paused at the whiteboard, now half filled with expansion notes for Australia and Brazil. And below that, a scribbled phrase I hadn't noticed before. "We are what we build when no one's watching." Naomi had written it, probably during another 2 a.m. brainstorm. I stood there a long moment, thinking about everything that had led to this. The rejection, the erasure, the late nights, the fake smiles, the underestimation. They didn't break me. They built me. Because I built this, not out of spite, but out of clarity. And the revolution, it didn't come with noise. It came with impact. 1 year to the day after that infamous family dinner, the one where they cut me off vaanced with a SoftBank deal, I stood barefoot on the rooftop of my Back Bay townhouse. The skyline of Boston stretched before me, a soft hum of light and motion. The air carried that early spring crispness where winter lingers but hope presses through anyway. I sipped my tea slowly, watching the city I'd once felt too small in now feel perfectly proportioned to who I'd become. CareBridge was operating in 6 countries. We had just finalized our 500th hospital contract. The foundation had funded 11 young women to attend university coding programs, most of whom came from neighborhoods like the one my mother pretended didn't exist. I hadn't cut my family out, but I'd cut them down to scale, like trimming back an overgrown tree, removing the shade so something new could grow. I saw them when it made sense. Christmas? Yes, but I left after dessert. Fiona's wedding? I sent a gift and a press release about our Brazil launch the same week. Preston invited me to dinner twice. I declined both, then offered to sponsor a mental health initiative through his firm. He never replied. But Evelyn? Evelyn came over every Thursday night. We drank wine, watched documentaries, and debated whether revolution looked better in tweed or techwear. She was the first person I told when CareBridge crossed $1 billion valuation. "You know," she said that night, twirling her wine glass, "you've become their cautionary tale and their bragging point. That's power." I laughed. And contradiction. The press still called me the heiress who outgrew her inheritance, which was flattering and untrue. I never needed their money. I needed room. And now I had it. My phone buzzed, an alert from our internal dashboard. New country approved. India. CareBridge expansion live. I stared at the screen, then looked back out over the city. In the beginning, I had coded through rage, built through rejection, pitched through invisibility. But tonight, I stood on the rooftop of my own story, not looking down on anyone, just looking forward. I picked up my phone and sent a single message to Naomi. Let's build something even bigger. Because that's what legacy should be. Not what you inherit, but what you design.
And now I want to hear from you. What did this story spark in you? Did it remind you of your own path, your own battles, your own quiet revolution? Drop your thoughts in the comments, whether it's a reaction, a reflection, or just one sentence that hit home. And hey, if this journey moved you even just a little, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter. I promise the next story might just be yours. Thanks for staying with me until the very end.